Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. I don't see any. Approval or amendments of meeting agenda. Draft motion, be it resolved that council approve the agenda of the regular meeting dated April the 6th, 2020 as presented. Mover and a seconder, please. Matt and Joe. Is there any discussion or amendments? Being none, all in favor? Carried. Item 4. Be it resolved that council approve the following minutes as presented. Regular council meeting dated March the 16th, 2020. A mover and a seconder, please. Bill and Pat. Any discussion on the last meeting? Being none, all in favor? Carried. Is there any business arising from the last minute meeting? None, okay. John, did we get any inquiries from the general public?
None received, Your Worship.
Be Maggie's turn now. Delegations and presentations. 7.1, Maggie Wilson, Chair of the Cobalt Historical Society, to speak on the temporary banning of entry to the town site and the right-of-way mined by the ONR. Be it resolved that, okay, sorry, we'll do that after the presentation. Okay, Maggie, the floor is all yours.
Hi, thank you, George, and thank you everyone for having me here tonight. I'm going to start with a little bit of who we are, what we do, and I should look here instead of over there, and history of the Cobalt Historical Society and the Heritage Silver Trail. We are a group of volunteers, a nonprofit corporation that was formed in 1999 and as a joint venture with the town of Cobalt and the township of Coleman. And us, the Cobalt Historical Society, and we preserve and promote the mining heritage in both the town and the township, and we consider ourselves the guardians of the Heritage Silver Trail. What brings me here tonight is the temporary banning of entry to two of the sites on the trail by ONR, the property owners. I'm going to now give you a brief history of the trail and when it began, with a special focus on the different government bodies and agencies that were involved with the trail. The province of Ontario, oh, it's right there. Okay, thank you. The province of Ontario told their resident geologist who had his office here in Cobalt to develop the trail. And so we did, and it opened in 1987, and there were 5 sites. And one of those sites was the right-of-way mine. The trail was expanded and it grew until around 1995. And at that point, it was under the auspices of the Cobalt Mining Museum. The Cobalt Historical Society was there only in terms of interested parties, but it wasn't a formal organization yet. In March of 1995, safety concerns and lack of funds threatened closure of 3 of the sites on the trail, and the government, the provincial government then had a very strong environmental protection mandate, and it threatened to close not only the Heritage Trail, but all of the remaining foundations, mill sites, mine sites that were standing in Cobalt and Coleman. A steering committee was convened to save the trail, and it included representatives from Agnico Eagle, the town, the township, the mining museum, and the Cobalt Historical Society Committee. Fortunately, by the end of 1995, there was a change in the government and some of those concerns were eased somewhat. From September 96 to 1999, the trail grew, including the town site mine now, and many of the government grants that were available back in that period were focused on tourism. Now, the reason that the Cobalt Historical Society was incorporated was so that the three players, the town, the township, and the Cobalt Historical Society could have access to some of that federal money. The two municipalities were not eligible to apply. So the Cobalt Historical Society was incorporated, and we managed to apply for and were granted along the line of about $750,000. The trail was officially opened in 1999, and there were plans to add more sites in the early 2000s. Cobalt is now starting to be noticed around not only the province, but around Canada as a heritage site. And TVO, the television network, held a contest and Cobalt won. We were named the most historic town in Ontario. Jumping to 2002, the federal government named Cobalt a National Historic Site. And we also were awarded one of the highest awards from the Ontario Historical Society for our work in preserving history. In 2002, again, we spent $65,000 to stabilize and repair the right-of-way, and by this point, we had already spent around $52,000 on the town site mine. One of the benefits of being a National Historic Site through Parks Canada is that there is funding available to take care of your properties. However, because we do not own or rent or lease the ONR properties, we are ineligible. We can't apply for funds. So we approached ONR and said, hey, how about working out an agreement where we'll be your agent, or we'll lease the property or rent the property. And initially, this was met with consideration. They agreed to pursue it, and we emailed back and forth a few times. Aaron Mullins came to visit the property a couple of times, but nothing ever came of that. And then in December of 2020, we thought, well, let's check in to see how we're going. COVID happened, you know, so maybe there's something now that we can find out about our request with the ONR. And the email that came back from them said it would be prudent if we restrict access to the sites, but they didn't say anything at that time about closure. However, 2 weeks ago, in the middle of March, we did get an email from ONR saying that they were erecting temporary barriers on the town site and on the right-of-way mine properties. They said that their concerns were liability and safety for the public. The safety concerns are both in terms of the environmental hazards and the structural hazards. We also would like to see the site safe and secure for visitors, obviously, and we also want to protect the structural integrity of the buildings, and we also want to preserve history. It's our observation that the new barriers do not secure the sites. If you go past the town site mine, you will notice that there is a barrier that is erected adjacent to the parking lot, and the no trespassing signs are on the south facing side, the away from the town side, so that anyone approaching the site from Galena and Miller Street wouldn't know that they're not supposed to be on that property. The right-of-way site is more secure, but we know that people will be people. We know that people will ignore the signs, or perhaps not understand what it means, or they will step over the barriers or around the barriers, or they'll go through the gaps in the barriers. This is a big concern for us, not only because people could hurt themselves. I mean, actually, I think that is the biggest concern, is that there's going to be, these barriers are now more of a hazard than what the site was before. We asked ONR, could an exception be made so that we might continue our work to inspect and make repairs to the damage that occurs. Vandalism is a perennial problem at the town site mine in particular. We're constantly replacing padlocks. We're constantly boarding up windows that are broken into. Sometimes they actually make it into the site, inside the buildings, which is an enormous concern for us when you consider arson and vagrancy and whatnot. that request to continue our role has been denied. So I come to the town tonight to thank you for the support you've shown so far, and I ask that you continue with that support. We have a heritage designation in process right now, and I urge you to continue with that, please. I would like to establish some sort of formal communication channel, a way for our organization to have back and forth with the town council, something more formal than it is now. Perhaps, as was done in the past, a liaison might sit at our meetings, or somebody that we can send our reports to, and that individual can then report back to council at meetings like this, and it would be recorded and available to the public, so that they can see who we are, what we're doing, and that both us and the town are dedicated to preserving heritage. Also, I request that somebody from the town, either delegation or Mayor Othmer, contact somebody at ONR to see if there's something that can be done to mitigate the situation as we see the concerns right now, or at least to establish a channel of communications. In 1995, threats of closure sparked people to rally together and to preserve their heritage. And here we are, 25 years later, facing the same concerns. The Right-of-Way Mine is a monument to the folks who worked here in Cobalt back in the very early days. And through the efforts of those very early citizens, the folks in the early 1900s, private and provincial corporations made a great deal of money, and that includes the railroad company. Back then it was the Temiskaming Northern Ontario Railroad. Today it's Ontario Northland Railroad. I believe that the head frame is also a testament to the efforts of those of us volunteers who have worked in recent years to preserve the iconic head frame. While putting this data together, one common theme emerged, and that is from the beginning, in 1985, municipal, provincial, and federal governments endorsed and improved and encouraged and promoted the work that the nonprofit volunteer groups were doing. And today, some of those same government bodies are now asking us to close our site. And to me, I perceive that as a risk to the best preserved head frame that still stands on its original footings. It's my hope that has happened in 1995 that we can rally again and to see that it stands for a great deal longer. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Maggie, and you guys have been doing a great job with that. I appreciate everything you've been doing.
Thank you, George.
Now I need a motion to accept the presentation. A mover and a seconder, please. Matt and Pat. Okay, we're going to open the floor up to discussion. Has anybody got any questions for Maggie? Go ahead, Bill.
Through you, Your Worship. Maggie, did the ONR, one of the concerns you cited was the structural integrity, and we're talking about the right-of-way. Did you get a report from them, or from us that indicates a structural engineer looked at it, saying that they have concerns with the stability of that structure?
I know better. No, I haven't received a report, Bill. The ENDM, the new name for the mining ministry, is spearheading all of the assessment work, and they're going to be putting out a proposal for tenders for doing the assessment work, the structural and the environmental work. Those postings, I believe, are supposed to be happening in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then who knows if it's going to even be done this year, and then that will be the end of stage 1, and then they'll look at stage 2, and it looks like it's going to be a long drawn out process.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not finished. Well, no, but I mean, they cited a concern. Like, I mean, they obviously just don't take this out of the top of their head that they feel that this structure is unstable. Like, how do they come up with this? I mean, you guys have been inspecting it regularly. I see there's no new timber on the side. So how did they come up with that, saying that that the structure is not stable?
I don't know the answer to that. I believe that's probably a question best posed to ONR.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe when we address the ONR, we can put that in our letter too. Pat, you have a question?
Not a question. I'd just like to say that I would love to be the liaison with the Historical Society, since I think I'm the last one from all the gang that was there when we first established the trail and went through all the fights. So I've had an interest in it since and worked at it since '85. So
Great.
if Maggie will have me.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Pat.
Is everybody good with Pat taking that over? Excellent. Doug, oh, your question or just a thumbs up? Sorry. Any other questions for Maggie? Okay, Maggie, we're going to sit down and I'll sit down with John. We'll fire off a letter to the ONR and see if we can get some answers.
Wonderful.
And we'll definitely keep in touch with you.
Thank you
Thank you very much for
George.
your presentation.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. Okay, all in favor of accepting the presentation? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, business arising from delegations and presentations. I guess we've handled that. Item 9, staff and committee reports. 9.1, Public Works. Anything on the Public Works report that you want a question or need clarification on? Matt? Go ahead, Matt.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I was just given a scratch. Nothing to add.
Okay, sorry. Okay, animal control. Concerns or questions? Okay, sorry, Joe. Joe had a question for Public Works. I'm sorry.
You say on the first item, they receive an 2020 MOE inspection report and discuss the results. Where's the results?
I can't answer.
I don't know. I didn't see.
Through you, Your Worship, the Ministry of Environment prepared a draft report, submitted it to staff, Aqua, myself, and we went through the draft report and I've made a number of suggestions and got back to where a couple of items. Actually, one of the items is later on in the bylaws section, which is a backflow water process, but the final report then has to come to us and then it goes to council. So the final report will actually come to council probably I'm hoping at the next meeting. We have not received it yet.
Okay. Sorry about that, Joe. I didn't see your hand up. Okay, 9.3, bylaw enforcement. Nothing for bylaw. Okay, fire chief. Questions, concerns? Okay, I'll ask John to give us a little bit of update on the last fire we've had then. Sorry, it's coming up later, I'm told. I didn't see it. Bill? believe they're available now, eh?
That's correct.
Yes, you always did need a permit. Questions? Okay, be it resolved that council accept the staff and committee reports as presented. Mover and seconder, please. Joe and Bill. Discussion has already been had. All in favor? Carried. Council for council direction, 10.1 review and adoption of the 2021 capital budget for the town of Cobalt. Be it resolved that council adopt the 2021 capital budget as presented or amended. Mover and seconder. Joe and Pat. Let's have a discussion on it. John will walk us through it. And if you have any questions, please raise your hands. I'll try and monitor everybody.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. You have in front of you a spreadsheet that shows on the up and down axis, the wide axis, the projects that we're either anticipating or actually have looked at it already. To the right, as you go across, at the top, you'll see where we're sourcing the funding for these particular items. The actual capital budget that we're looking at is around, well, approximately $1.4 million. The majority of that is the garage. As you know, the council has submitted a resolution in the past in confirming that the garage has to be replaced. There's engineering studies now that, or recommendations that we should be replacing that structure. We have submitted to the Infrastructure Ontario for a long-term loan of $900,000, and we anticipate and have been receiving quotes to replace the garage, and believe that we can put a structure in there for that amount of money, and with the ability, of course, that in the future it can be added on to. That along with the first row or column where it says municipal taxes, we have $31,000 that we're anticipating going to the taxpayer for. The rest of the amount comes out of funding opportunities. So looking as when it relates to taxes, when we look at our operational budget later on, this particular capital budget says we're going to need $31,000 in capital from the taxpayer, and then we're going to need the long-term debt repayment annually over a 20-year period from the taxpayer. Now, everyone's had a chance to see this. If you look over at the left, the projects that we're looking at, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, but there are a good number of them. The two projects, the head frame and the fire museum upgrades, have been approved by council because they were in an unsafe condition. So that's a capital that we anticipate funding through the gas tax. The library, there's some work to be done on the external brickwork and the Drummond, and the roof is sort of in desperate repair mode, and we've got a budget on that of, or a quote on that for in and around the amount of $23,000. We're putting in a drop box in the front of the municipal office, and because of that, it'll require some security. We're working on the security upgrades right now. The cost of the drop box and the security upgrades will come out of the COVID funding that we have. COVID funding was just increased. Number 7, please interrupt anybody as we're going along, or you can save it to the end, but the garage itself is $900,000. We have applied for funding under the federal government. The chances of getting it, we're not quite sure. Mayor Rothberg has approached the MP. We've sent the application to the MP as a copy for his information, and if we do get the funding, well, that'll be great, and that'll reduce the long-term debt for the municipality. But the fact remains that it has to be replaced, and that's why it's in the capital budget now.
Hello?
Do we have any idea of any ballpark figure of what the payment on that's going to be going forward in future budgets?
The long-term debt, it goes forward for 20 years. That's correct. So the 900,000 is amortized over 20 years.
So we have no idea of what kind of interest rate we're looking at or what kind of payment or anything?
Yes, we do. Yes. So Infrastructure Ontario is, they're looking at around a 2% interest rate for these types of projects. Going forward, the long-term debt with this garage will be in the range of less than 30% of what our municipal guidelines allow by the province. The province determines how much we can borrow. So our borrowing will be in and around about 25% of what we can actually, what they say we can afford. But it's still a fairly significant cost that we have to look at. So,
And, no, I guess the question, maybe I didn't phrase the question correctly. What kind of payment is going to impact the budget going forward? Like we see it, it's in the finance column, but that doesn't, it's not really part of the budget because we're financing it. So is there an estimate on what the payment's going to be?
yes, our total payment is going to be $34,000 for the 2021 year. That will be to cover the rest of assuming it goes ahead in April. But next year, when it's fully amortized, every year from now till the 20-year period, it's $68,000 a year.
So shouldn't we be seeing that estimated payment for 34,000 in the budget somewhere? Should that not be in a column?
The $34,000 is in a column in the operational budget. So that's where it's tied. The operation budget ties into the capital, and that's why you can consider this a draft approval, because when the council looks at the operational budget, it will show our long-term debt. It doesn't show on the capital side.
Okay. And we can change the capital budget after we see the operational budget, see the overall impact if needed?
If needed, council has full determination on approving the capital and the operational. It makes it's easier for budgeting process and budget determination to have a good and clear idea what your capital is first. And then when you do your operational budget, you know the cost of your capital. And so you either, if cuts are to be made, your cuts are in the operation side or on the capital side.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't cemented into this capital budget by approving it ahead of time before we approve the operational without seeing the overall impact on the ratepayers.
Very good, absolutely.
Okay, just a little further on that particular point, there will be a budget meeting for the operational side prior to next council meeting. And at the next council meeting on April 27th, we hope to present the 2021 budget for council consideration, operational and then formalizing the capital. Oh, I think.
Doug? Go ahead, Doug.
Just getting unmuted. Will that next meeting for budget considerations be separate and apart from our regular agenda? This is the first time I've ever gone at a budget meeting in part of a regular council session. Usually we've always done a separate budget meeting.
Okay. Well,
It was because we wanted to present the capital side of it first for your approval, of course, and your changes if you have any. or suggestions?
Certainly, a budget meeting by the full council is something that can be done also. And likely is a good idea. And it, you know, somewhere in and around the end of the week before the regular council meeting, there could be an open budget meeting. And if that's what's council's direction, that's fine, and we'll prepare for that.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, through your worship, we did sit on a pre-meeting. The only one that wasn't there from council was Angela. I was on the committee, so we looked at this, and this was just to be presented. It's not set in stone. So just to make that clear that we did have an opportunity as a committee to go over the capital budget.
Thanks, Bill. Pat?
Just out of curiosity, since I'd never seen this item before, under roads number 12, what's a trench box? What's it do?
A trench box is a piece of equipment that protects the workers when they are working on below the surface of the ground. So in other words, in a trench,
okay,
so that they don't have to go back so far that they can actually put it into a narrower workplace, and they're protected while they're below the surface.
Yeah.
It's something that's been on the list for quite a while, and that we do not have and should have.
Oh,
Yeah, just to reiterate, through your worship, there is a lot of funding that's out there for a lot of this stuff. So make that clear. I'm not sure if you spoke about that, John, that there is funding available. The other thing that I think I asked at the meeting was the roof at the library. I did notice that it is in bad shape. I guess the shingles need to be replaced. The question I asked is whether we could do it rather than replace them with shingles, could we not do them so that it's going to put something on that'll last a lot longer than shingles, such as aluminum or steel, which seems to be the way to go today. You were supposed to have, somebody was supposed to maybe price that just to, I know there's $24,000 set aside, but it would be nice to get a permanent roof that would last.
Just on that, I did look into that situation, and the issue just with the library structure is it has a slope right down over the entranceway. So there's always danger. One danger with a metal roof is obviously ice and snow coming off, but even with guards on that, I think the fellow that gave us a quote for the shingles mentioned that also to the people at Public Works, that there is a possible dangerous situation from the actually the way the building is constructed.
any more questions at the moment? Okay.
So carrying on, you'll see there, everything is sort of lumped together. We've got municipal buildings, then public works, then water plant, sewer, roads, planning, parks, and fire department. So we'll go through it briefly. The water department, the water tank, we have to drain it and realign it. It's due for that. And there's funding through the funding process and the OSIF funding. It's already designated as a project that was supposed to have been finished last year and is going to be finished this spring. There are some items that will improve the efficiency at the water plant. That's sort of at the tail end now that we've completed it. There are a couple of items that both Aqua and our staff have said are important. And again, funding through gas tax on that. The assimilative capacity study is what we're looking at, and council's approved it in principle. And that is for the study itself, and there is a sampler data logger which is in there, and that's measures the flow output at the wetlands. Right now it's a paper chart and it's has some issues, so we're going to a little bit of a better one. And we're taking that out of sewer reserves to do that. The roads, We're allocating the trench box, and we're also allocating towards $75,000 worth of paving. The official plan is something that is long overdue, and I think if we're looking forward as to where we want to go, I think it's important that the official plan be looked at. And we have some asset managed, there's some provincial requirements for a service level study to be done. It was supposed to be this July. We're almost there, but now they've extended it, but we just like to finish it off. And that's a natural under the OSIF funding. We've applied for a tech park upgrade in the amount of $110,000. We've said in our application that we would be doing 10,000 in kind or from taxes. So you see that that's funded 10,000 in taxes and 100,000 under the community healthy funding. Again, we're hoping for that. The fire department is looking at wanting to get 4 mandatory bunker suits as they rotate these under provincial legislation. So if you go down and look at the yellow side, the yellow across, those are the totals. And if you go 2 over 136, you'll see sitting by itself, and 92,000 sitting by itself. That is the dry powder, or the money that hasn't been allocated, but there is room for it to be allocated under OSIF and gas tax. It's fairly significant, as you can see. And for that, the reason for that is we haven't received the full parameters for OSIF and gas tax. We believe we know the numbers, but we don't know the parameters for funding. We also know that there are a number of projects that the province and the federal government are talking about rolling out this year. A couple that are of interest. One is a hoist room funding. That hasn't been announced yet. And the other one is to have better access to this hall up here in the form of an elevator and a new entrance. So the intention is, let's leave it as that, and it'll give council the opportunity to either look at those 2 projects to see if that's your priority, or if there are a number of other priorities that you see going in there. The only problem we have is we can't seem to get a definite answer from the province on what the parameters are for funding. They told us what the amount is, but they just haven't told us the parameters. So that rolls out 1.4, close to $1.5 million in capital funding, capital projects, most of which, 90% of which is funded through different funds or long-term debt.
Okay, thank you, John. Angela?
So just 2 things. I know that we've got money left still in the OSIF and the gas tax. The parameters for OSIF and gas tax, for every dollar spent, how much does a municipality have to contribute for each one of those? Sorry, every dollar funded, how much does the municipality have to put in?
There's no offsetting municipal dollars
On either one?
on either one.
Okay. And just for comfort level, is there any possible way to relabel this as the draft capital budget?
Sure, we can do that, yeah.
Certainly we can
No
do that.
problem.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, concerns, comments? Anybody have any suggestions? Feel free to call John at any time during the day. And if you've got something you'd like to add or discuss, feel free to do so. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I like the fact that, through you, Your Worship, sorry. I like the fact that there may be funding for the gym, because I've been getting a lot of questions from some of our citizens to try to get that thing open. It's been sitting with us for a couple of years now. It'd be nice to get it over with and get a place where we could have normal gym hours again.
Absolutely. Else? Okay, be it resolved that council adopt the 2021 capital budget as presented or amended. Moved by Matt and Bill. Feel free to call John if you have anything to add. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Review 10.2, review of the recent decision by ONR to restrict access to 2 mine head frames on the Heritage Silver Trail. Well, we'll put a letter together, I guess, and send it to ONR and see if we can get some responses out of them. Is there any suggestions you'd like to throw at us and something you'd like to see in that letter? Sorry, there was a draft resolution. Be it resolved that Cobalt approach Ontario Northland to support the designation of the right-of-way head frame once the assessment has been completed. A mover and a seconder, please. Matt and Bill. Okay, discussion. Anything you'd like to have added to that letter? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, through you, your worship. Again, I would like to know their concerns, and if they're concerned about the structural stability, I'd like to know how they came about that and how did they, just put a blatant statement out there saying there's a concern with the structural stability. I mean, obviously, to me, I'm thinking they may have had an structural engineer there and looking at it because that's a pretty strong statement to make.
We'll try and get that when we send them a letter. Matt, you had your hand up?
Through your worship, further to Councillor Gabani's point, I'd just like to see some clear and concise communication from the ONR, not the doublespeak and what we're seeing now. We need to see actual reasoning as to why these have been shut. And I'd like to hear their reasoning for the concrete barriers. I understand they're trying to cut access to the properties themselves, but those barriers do nothing. So I'd like to open up some actual dialogue instead of just dealing with the public relations manager and get some real answers before we have 2 historical sites that unfortunately deteriorate beyond repair. Thank you.
Absolutely, because I think that's the way they're going to be going. Who else? I seen a hand up there a second ago. Angela?
I'm very confused. So are these sites that the ONR actually owns?
They're sites that are on their property.
Okay, so they're under no obligation to give us any information, really, if it's on their property, are they?
Well,
I just think we need to be cautious how we approach it.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
Given our designation as a National Historical Site, I believe it's incumbent upon the ONR to provide us with actual reasoning behind their decision to close off these sites. It's an appropriate behavior for a partner such as the ONR with the municipality. And I believe that we, again, as a National Historic Site and a large intact archaeological site, are entitled to at least an explanation that isn't doublespeak and media relations jargon.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Johnson on that aspect. I don't know why we have to be cautious. We're just asking the question as to why they're shutting it down and restricting access. I mean, if they got a concern and it's a legitimate concern because they've had an engineer look at it, well then yes. But to me, I don't think they're just bringing this on because the Historical Society Cobalt been checking that building quite regularly. So all of a sudden they put a restriction to the access. So I think we need to ask the question.
And we will ask it. And unfortunately, these they are within the town boundaries. They're on ONR property, but they're icons. We have one at each end of the town, ironically, and they're the last 2 icons that we have. And as Historical Society said those, the one at the north end is probably the one of the last remaining head frames that's in the shape that it's in, and we have to do what we can to keep it preserved. Any other questions, comments? All in favor? Thank you. 10.3, approval of a fire safety grant program, transfer payment agreement in the amount of $4,800 for increased training opportunities and the establishment of a virtual inspection program. Be it resolved that the town of Cobalt enter a transfer payment agreement with the province of Ontario in the amount of $4,800. A mover and a seconder, please. Doug and Matt. Discussion? Go ahead, Joe.
Just like to know, what is the inspection program?
I really answer that. It's probably something like a Zoom meeting. It's training for the fire department, basically. We'll find out more from the chief when he can give us a little more information on it. Any more questions? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, through your worship, I have a lot of questions tonight. Now that we're on the fire safety training, this is a question totally unrelated to this grant, but I think at the last meeting you were talking about inspection of suits because they're hardly used in a small town compared to a bigger city. And yet the cost of them are what, close to 8,000 or how much are they? $8,000, I believe, for a suit? 4,000?
Bunker suit is probably around $5,000.
Yeah.
And they have to be changed every 10 years.
Yes. And so they go by date rather than by inspection. They could be maybe used once and they're sitting there and they haven't been used. And I think what you were saying, you were trying to get an actual inspection process rather than just a date, which would save us money.
Bunker suits have been a pet peeve of mine for the 37 years I've been on the fire department, because we do have suits that are used 3 times in 10 years and then we have to shelve them. And I'd like to send something to the Solicitor General and see if we can get that changed. That's fine for the city of Toronto or any other major city where they're wearing them continuously. Our guys don't wear theirs that continuous.
And I'd like to make this public that I totally agree with you, your worship, on that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Doug.
Just wondering if with regard to the suits, well, first of all, in our capital budget, it's 4 sets for 8,500, so they're about 2,200 each. But is it a question of the materials breaking down over time rather than breaking down due to usage?
My understanding, having spent so much time in the service, is that it goes by usage. We'll get that number clarified. I don't know why it says 4 there, but. Okay, is there any more comments? Okay, I guess it's going to stay on. Moved by, can we have a vote on this? All in favor? That we accept that? Okay, thank you very much. Correspondence for council information. 10.4, clerk treasurer to provide an update on the upcoming Vivian Highlands Art Tour, Cobalt Arts History Shines. Go ahead, John.
Just a little update. You've seen the one-page report that was brought in by David Bridges. He's working with the Timiskaming Foundation and ourselves on not only there's a poetry program and also some plaques that recognize the work of the poets in Vivian Highlands' name.
Questions, concerns, comments? Discussion? No? Well, it'd be a nice way to honor Vivian. She was a great fan of the town of Cobalt, so. Okay, 10.5, report on the fire at One Prospect to be provided by the clerk treasurer.
So as everyone knows, the fire destroyed the upper portion significantly at the what's known as the motel or the inch block. The engineer worked with our building inspector. A order was put in that you cannot access either the top floor or the bottom floor. That order was amended when an engineer decided that it was safe for the former residents to go in there and get their personal belongings, of which they've done and moved out. The order still stands that the building itself cannot be habitable until such time as a full engineer's report comes in, and going forward with either renovations, upgrade, or to make it either tear it down or make it into habitable apartments. Any work that will go on has to have the stamp of a engineer or an architect, and until such time as that happens, there's to be no occupancy in there. Unfortunately, the fire marshal doesn't investigate fires that have damage under $1 million, so the cause itself is unknown. My understanding from the building inspector who looks at the orders that he's getting cooperation from the owner. He has seen the owner, and the owner has representative that was on site and met with the building inspector. So we're hoping that this thing goes forward in a reasonable manner.
Okay, does anybody have any questions of the CAO? Go ahead, Matt.
Through you, Your Worship, who's responsible for securing the building itself? I know the municipality isn't, but I'd like to know who is responsible, because there's frequent traffic in and out of that building still.
No, the owner is responsible, 100%. Now the owner has an order that they are to comply with, and in my conversation with the building inspector, they meet or have met what is required in the order, and certainly it's not our area of authority to sort of stand guard in that area to see who is coming and going, but it is our responsibility to make sure if it is unsafe that nobody can stay there.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, 10.6, update to be given on the 2 upgrade projects located at the Fire Museum building and the Willett Green Miller headframe.
General Council approved these 2 particular projects. The contractor picked up the key for the Fire Museum on Friday and has been working over the weekend on the building. And I'm not quite sure that I wasn't able to get in there today to see how far along they are, but I know that they have been working at it. And I had a call or a message just before I left this evening from the engineer that's did the drawings for the upgrade. So fortunately, I never got to speak to him on that. Now, their plan, as I understand it, in speaking with the engineer, is that they will be completing this project fairly quickly, and then we'll proceed on to the head frame and make that safe. And I'm hoping that we can get the fencing out from away from not only in front of the Fire Museum, but also in front of the cairn and across from the library, and in front and around the head frame.
Any questions on them 2 projects? Go ahead, Bill.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. John, the contractor, is it the same contractor for both buildings?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. 10.8, notice provisions from the Ontario Energy Board about the, 10.7, Provincial Offence Act reporting for 2020 and the budget for 2021. Any questions on that? We'll get an update later on from Councillor Johnson. 10.8, notice of provisions from the Ontario Energy Board about the Enbridge franchise application. Any questions? Okay. 10.9, Mining Museum financial statement and budget for 2021. All good, okay. Be it resolved that council accept the correspondence for council information. Moved by Pat and Matt. Any more discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Bylaws 11.1, council considering the reading of the first and second time bylaw 2021-12 for requiring the cleaning and cleaning of yards. Be it resolved that council adopt bylaw 2021-12 providing for maintaining land in a clean and clear condition, clean yards, identified as Schedule A, attached hereunto and forming part of this bylaw. Read a first and second time the 6th day of April 2020. Moved by Matt and Bill. Discussion? Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't accept the policy as it's presented to us for what I hope are some pretty good reasons. Firstly, under Part 3, General Standards Regulations, items 3.2 and 3.3, for the purposes of Section 3.1, keeping clear includes removal of dead, decayed, or damaged trees or other natural growth and the branches or limbs thereof, which create an unsafe condition in relation to the environment. And B, the removal, trimming, or cutting of weeds, grass, or ground cover of more than 8 inches, 20 centimeters in height. I have problems with both of those statements because they pretty much fly in the face of what has evolved over the last few decades of what is good and proper husbandry for natural, other natural creatures who are our neighbors living in these places. I could find some quotes for you that demonstrate the kinds of uses that a tree filled with woodpecker holes can provide as homes for some insects. The removal, trimming, and cutting of weeds. A weed, by definition, is a plant that's unwanted in an area, but not all weeds are unwanted. It depends on one's point of view. I think the dandelion comes to mind. I know people who use dandelion greens in salads, so they look at it as a cultivar rather than a weed. Equally, dandelions are the first food available to bees in the spring. There are other kinds of things that are great for all kinds of pollinators. Things like goldenrod, which is about 3 feet high, well exceeds the 8 inches height limit, but should not necessarily at this point in time in our evolution be arbitrarily ruled out. 30 or 40 years ago, I would have said, yeah, that's what we do. But in the last 30 or 40 years, we've seen an awful lot. We've been treated to all manner of cataclysmic extinctions, particularly in insect communities. Our bees are probably the most popular and recognizable one today. But I think really, if we want to do a good job for the people of Cobalt and for our natural world, then we should look at putting in a section there that highlights encouraging building environments for the rest of the world around us rather than limiting and destroying those kinds of things. Similarly, Section 3.3, in determining compliance with 3.2, due consideration shall be paid to the distinction between groomed lawns and naturalized or undeveloped areas, particularly in relationship to the surrounding environment. I'm not sure I know I can't agree with that either. I don't know what due consideration means, who's doing the considering, how carefully they're considering, what kinds of things they're taking into consideration. But I think we can do a much better way of wording that section to make it more meaningful in today's world. Similarly, there were some other ones in here that I thought. Item 3.15. It's dealing with wrecked, dismantled, discarded, abandoned, and otherwise inoperative unlicensed vehicles. And 3.14 A and B are fine. 3.15 says that shall not apply to owners who are actively restoring not more than one vehicle and or hobby vehicle, provided the vehicles are stored in an enclosed structure or located in the manner as to be screened from view. I'm not sure I understand why a hobbyist needs to be limited to one vehicle, particularly if the other requirement is that they be located in a manner as to be screened from view by neighboring residents and adjacent roadways. I'm not sure I see the difference, but I think if one is an active hobbyist and one sees an opportunity to buy another vehicle, it would be a shame to be unable to indulge your hobby because you're already working on one and can't bring the second one onto your property. These kinds of things strike me as being a little bit too arbitrary, and remove that limitation, not more than one, and I'd be happy with it. There was one other item in here that I thought we should look at. Yeah, on very nearly the last page. Well, the offensive, the set fines pages. Again, 2 I have trouble with because of the limitation of the 8 inches in height. I think we're going about that the wrong way. And my last one, Article 19, fail to produce any documents or things required by a bylaw officer. I just really can't accept or things as being appropriate in a bylaw. It needs to be better defined than that. So those are my objections to it. What I would ask council to do is to send it back to our staff who've done a really good job thus far, but see if we can come up with a more positive document that more closely relates to our current environmental times. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yes, I appreciate Councillor Wilcox's comments, but I can't agree with, especially with the vehicles. I mean, one vehicle is enough because in my opinion, one vehicle, you're going to restore a vehicle, allow one vehicle. You allow more than one vehicle, one leads to 2, one leads to 3. I will not forget about that job. I'm going to start doing this other job. So you know what? You got a vehicle, you're going to restore it, get it finished. I can't see allowing more than one vehicle. I disagree with that. I like the fact that we keep our lawn, try to keep our lawns clean and free. There are some people who do really good jobs, and it's disheartening when they clean their yards and somebody else doesn't give a damn about their yards. So I like the way it is. And I say not change nothing.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Pat?
Well, I fully agree with Doug on the environmental aspects. The trees we have, the old ones, we try and clip back where we can, but they are important for the environment. When branches do come down too, they gradually provide more nutrients for the soil. And for those of us that live in the end of town that are on the rock, there's only one thing that grows in our yards, and that's what the rest of the world calls weeds. But as far as I'm concerned, if that weed flowers, it belongs in my yard. And we judge on the yard as to how high it goes for letting those plants grow so that they're ready to reseed and everything. We can't have one of those pristine yards unless we spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars to bring in truckload after truckload after truckload of dirt from somewhere else. And to me, that's totally unnecessary.
Thank you, Pat. Angela?
I'm kind of with Doug and Pat on this, as owning two vacant lots in order to have a parking area off of the street. That is a hive of wildlife. I have birds, I have like hours of enjoyment that I sit out on my veranda and I watch them and I hear them, and there is no way on God's green earth that I'm going to keep the grass less than 8 inches over there. It's on a hill, it's on rocks, and nor am I going to pay a landscape company $300-400 a month to come in and maintain it. We live in a town that is on hills. Kudos to those that have flatter yards and can have a nice lawn. But that's not always realistic in this town. And if you have rocks protruding, you're on bedrock, it makes it very difficult to be running a lawnmower around. So I think there's got to be a little more distinction in this bylaw than what we have. This is like a cookie cutter. And it's, yeah, this would be fine for like a city that has uniform lots and they're all laid out nicely, but that's not the case here. And
Okay, thank you.
I just,
Doug, and then Matt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to Councillor Gabani's comments, first of all, I would note that he is quite right when he says we have some very wonderful gardens in town. And I very much appreciate a green carpet of lawn as much as the next person. But to say that the others don't give a damn, I think is very unfair and unfortunate. Because someone goes for a natural habitat doesn't mean they care less or don't give a care at all. It means they care about something that is significantly more important to them than just green grass. We won't bother to point out, if you want a nice green garden, then you sock the fertilizer to it, and that stuff runs off into the water system and becomes a polluting item. There's all kinds of pros and cons to all of these things. Someone wants a green lawn, I wish them well, I encourage it. But if somebody wants to go natural and provide a haven for life's little creatures that are currently endangered, then I'm very much for that as well. And I think if we're going to do a bylaw of this nature, we should reflect both sides of that argument. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Matt?
Through your worship, I'm in agreement with Councillors Adshead, Anderson, and Wilcox. Without boring anybody to tears here, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the species that we're dealing with here in northeastern Ontario can be considered what they call a keystone species. Honeybees in particular are a keystone species, and they're very important to the growth of many fruits and vegetables. They're pollinators. There are so many good qualities with honeybees, and I think that by moving forward with 3.2 and 3.3 within this bylaw, we are doing ourselves any type of service to preserve a very important keystone species such as a honeybee, just to name one of many that seek refuge within different rotting wood. That said, if you have a 30-foot tree that poses a significant health and safety risk to the general public, I mean, that's something entirely different. But if you have a rotting log on your property that you'd like to maintain in an effort to provide a safe haven for species that are, living within it, I think that should be allowed. We're not in Southern Ontario suburbia here. We're in Northeastern Ontario. This area prides itself on the diversity of our natural environment, and to push through a bylaw such as this, I believe it just turns us into that generic, horrible suburbia mess that people move north to get away from and that we value so dearly. So I'm in agreement with the other councillors. I believe in this case, we need to take a look at 3.2 and 3.3 and try and rework that so it provides better protection for those species and provides the ability to remain as diverse as we are currently. Again, we're not suburbia, we are Northeastern Ontario, and I'd appreciate if our bylaws could reflect that.
Thank you, Councillor Matt. Doug?
Nope.
Your hand's up there. I thought you had something.
Thank you, Your Worship, but I think I've pretty much presented my side of the argument. And as I say, I very much appreciate Councillor Gabani's point about green grass and, you know, making a yard look beautiful. I'm 100% behind that for those who want to do that. But I'm also a conservationist, and I very much believe in treating life generally as equitably as we possibly can for our own good.
No problem. Okay, you got something else, Bill?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. My concern again is we never heard the other councillors talk about more than one vehicle. And also my concern about the trees. There's places here where there's trees on the property line that are actually growing on somebody else's property, hanging over branches and stuff like that. So this is where my concern was with the tree aspect of it. I know I got a couple places here where they've got big cedars and they're right over on the other guy's plot. Not very happy camper. And I haven't heard, like, again, I haven't heard the other councillors talk about more than 2 vehicles for hobby. I think 1 is enough. For more than 2, I think 2 to lead to 3, 3 to 4. Then you got a bunch of vehicles. So I'd like to hear their comments on that.
Okay, go ahead, Angela, and then Matt, and then that'll be the end of that.
I believe the rule for trees overhanging your property line onto somebody else's property is the person owning the other property is well within their rights to trim those trees. Problem solved. Or they can approach their neighbor and ask them if they wouldn't mind trimming them. I know that's how it worked in Southern Ontario. Guy's tree overhung the fence. I trimmed it off on my side. Nothing, no hard feelings. As for more than 1 vehicle, if it's screened from view or it's enclosed in a building, I don't see what right we have to control somebody else's life. They pay their taxes, they live on their property. If they have a shop and they want to have more than 1 vehicle in their shop that they want to work on as a hobby, I don't see a problem with that. Maybe we need to look at setting a capping limit on it, and that it definitely has to be enclosed and screened from view, rather than limiting the number.
Thank you, through your worship. Just to touch on hobby vehicles. Well, years ago, I was one of those people who would pull home a hobby vehicle, a 50s or 60s vehicle, and work on it. I mean, during my teenage years, it kept me out of a significant amount of trouble. It was a hobby that you could get into and build at your own leisure. I believe it's a very positive way to maintain a hobby. I think that in order to do so, in my personal experience, you pull home 1 car, you're going to have at least another parts car there. And again, if they're screened from view, I don't see where we get off trying to tell people that they can or they can't have these vehicles on their properties. Again, screened from view, you know, not put up on cinder blocks in the middle of their yard, you know, some common sense around it. Maybe just reword that to allow for a hobby car and +1 parts car, as long as it matches set criteria. I think that would be a better way of going about it. I get the concerns from Councillor Gabani, and I get the concerns from a lot of residents around the area, because there are quite a few residents who may be doing it wrong currently. That said, a good bylaw is one that, again, is clear and concise and can be easily translated by all members of the public and our ratepayers in general. And I believe by rewording that to allow some wiggle room with the understanding that this is a hobby and it does require more than 1 vehicle on occasion would be beneficial, especially when we do finalize this bylaw.
Okay, Doug, you're going to have to make this one very short.
Sure, and then I can't unmute the darn thing. First of all, I guess I flash back to a very successful late night television host who has a garage filled with all manner of cars. And I would hate to turn to him and say, you can't move here because you can only have one of those cars now. I think anything we can do to attract wealthier people or people who are that kind of an extreme hobbyist is all for the better for our town. The other comment would be, obviously, it is Cobalt. Our lots are generally small. You can only put so many cars on a lot and no more, and especially if you're having to screen them from view. So I don't see any value in putting some kind of a limit on things. Let people do what people want to do on their own property, as long as it doesn't create an eyesore. Problem solved.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. John's got to add something here to this bylaw.
So the reason why the bylaw itself is coming for first and second only is that it does generate, without the committee of the whole, that gives council more opportunity to look at all the information and make judgments on it and provide input. This particular issue is subjective, I think, and I believe the comments that have come back from many on council provides enough information for staff to redraft for the third reading wording that satisfies the majority. So I believe the proper thing to do is pass first and second reading, and then the third reading will our responsibility as staff to come back with the amendments that have been suggested, and council can either defer at that time or give it the third reading.
Okay, so we'll send this back to staff for reworking, and we'll pass it the next meeting. We don't have to make.
Okay, the council has a decision. It can go first and second reading, or the matter can be deferred and come back for 3 readings.
Okay, so Doug, go ahead.
Given my opposition to the way it's worded right now, I couldn't possibly vote in favor of this. There's just no way. So I would suggest it come back for a first and second, and then perhaps a third at a later meeting.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's fine. Okay, we can do it that way. We won't vote on it then. We'll just defer it to our next meeting to come back as a document again. Okay, 11.2, council to consider reading bylaw 2021-13 to provide for the prevention of backflow to the water supply of the town of Cobalt. Be it resolved that council adopt bylaw 2021-13 to provide for the prevention of backflow and cross-connection controls to the water supply of the town of Cobalt. Read a first and second and third time and finally passed the 6th day of April 2021. Mover and seconder, please. Angela and Doug. Discussion on it? Go ahead, Angela.
Can I ask what prompted this to come up? And I'm kind of at a loss what application, where this application would come in.
Go ahead, John.
The Ministry of Environment, when they did the water review, strongly suggested that we have a water backflow prevention policy or bylaw in the event that there is an industrial type operation that is built where there is a possibility that through whatever reason, back suction or backflow of water goes back into the system. So any industrial building has a backflow preventer on the water that for some does not allow it to get into our system. In other words, if you're upstream and there's an industry and it allows some pollutant to get into your water supply, then it goes right through our system. So that's what that's all about.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? All in favor? Okay. Okay, item 12, general business. None. Motion for which prior notice has been given, we have none. Mayor's report, we have none. Notice of motion, we also have none. And councillor updates, 16.1, Councillor Wilcox to provide a report on library board activities. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very pleased to report to Council that the appointees we offered to the board have all joined on to the Cobalt Public Library Board. Maggie Wilson is the new chairperson of the board. Colleen McNaught stays on as vice chair. Kendra Lecarte will be assuming duties as secretary librarian as well as CEO of the library. So it was a very positive meeting. A lot of good things happened. There are a couple of items of information that I thought might be of interest to our community at large. Well, 4 summer students have been applied for through the Canada Summer Jobs Program. So we're hoping to hear back from them sometime soon to see what we can do. They've applied to the Healthy Communities Grant for equipment for a makerspace. It's a new one, so they're hoping they can get the grant in. They have received, I think of special interest, day use vehicle passes from Ontario Parks. The library has 3 day passes free of charge, which can be loaned out to our patrons from January 1st, 21 till December 31st, 21. Library users will be able to borrow a park permit that provides access for 1 vehicle and its occupants to more than 100 provincial parks in Ontario. So that was kind of fun news for everybody. And lastly, I just want to note, I reported earlier we were buying a 3D printer. The grant money came in for that from the Temiskaming Foundation in October 2019. And with all of the delays due to COVID, its delay was continued until most recently. It's now been purchased and it's in the process of being set up. So hobbyists, enthusiasts, and other likers of 3D printers may soon have an opportunity to do it right here in Cobalt. And that's my report.
Excellent. We wish them well. Does anybody have any questions of Councillor Wilcox? Okay. 16.2, Councillor Johnson to provide a report on the Provincial Offence Committee.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, through you. I had the pleasure of attending my first Provincial Offences Committee meeting. We went over the annual report and financials. I'd like to touch on the key initiatives that were implemented during 2020 and the key initiatives that are being launched for 2021, as those are probably the most informative. Let's see. So the 2020 key initiatives, a number of continuous improvement initiatives were implemented. So there's been an online payment portal on the City of Temiskaming Shores website added for payment of fines. Review of files, launch of audio court proceedings through the Zoom platform was launched, obviously, due to the COVID pandemic. And the development of an early resolution process with our prosecutors here to help relieve the backlog. There's significant backlogs in the court system currently because in-person hearings and have obviously been stalled due to the pandemic. And then the final point was research for outstanding fines and writing off fines of deceased individuals, which goes without saying. Key initiatives for 2021 that are going to be launched. Implementation of a video hybrid court proceeding in alignment with the court resumption procedures. With COVID stretching on as long as it has, the courts do need to get back to the business at hand and try and relieve some of that backlog. So the implementation of a video hybrid court proceeding has been mentioned and is being launched for 2021. And then the change in the walk-in guilty plea process in order to reduce costs for having fax machines at 2 court locations. That was another issue that was discussed. Other than that, there was significant discussion around the COVID pandemic and how it is affecting our court system currently. Right now, there's really only one location for any hybrid court proceeding. There was significant discussion around another location being implemented in the Kirkland Lake region, or in Kirkland Lake, but the discussion did not progress any further. So I'll have an update after the next meeting, which is in early fall of 2021. And I will be bringing updates as they become available to our council meetings.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Does anybody have any questions for Councillor Johnson? No. Okay, Councillor questions and answers. None. Closed session, we have none, therefore we have no business arising from a closed session. Confirmation bylaw, be it resolved that bylaw number 2021-14 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council of the corporation of the town of Cobalt be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed the 6th day of April 2021. And further, that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and recorded in the bylaw book. A mover and a seconder, please. Pat and Angela, all in favor? Thank you. Carried. Adjournment. Be it resolved that the regular meeting of council be adjourned at, I don't have my time. What time is it? 7:56. Moved by Doug and Matt. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening.